A poor loyal worker inherited an old rusty car nobody wanted, and the car changed his life. The morning they laughed at Desmond Pruitt, he was holding a mop. That was fitting. He was almost always holding a mop. It was a Tuesday in early October, the kind of grey Kentucky morning where the fog sat heavy over Clover Ridge and the mill chimney looked like it was exhaling something tired into the sky. Desmond had arrived at 5:45, same as every morning for 30 years, same as he would arrive tomorrow and the day after that, because that was the kind of man he was. The kind who showed up before anyone else thought to. He was mopping the hallway outside the second-floor break room when Craig Fetters walked past with two men Desmond did not recognize, suits, out-of-town shoes, the particular posture of people who had come to the Callaway textile mill to decide something rather than to work in it. Craig Fetters was the floor supervisor. He had been at the mill 12 years and managed people the way a man manages a mild inconvenience, with just enough attention to keep things from boiling over, and not one drop more. He noticed Desmond the way he always noticed Desmond, which was the way you noticed a piece of furniture you had grown accustomed to stepping around. One of the suited men glanced down at the mop bucket. Then at Desmond. Then, with the particular ease of a man who has never had to be careful about what he says in front of people like Desmond, he laughed softly and said to Craig, "How long has that guy been here?" Craig shrugged. "Since before I got here. 30 years, give or take. 30 years mopping the same floor." The man shook his head, not unkindly, which was almost worse than if he had been unkind. "Who?" And they walked on. Desmond kept mopping. He did not change pace. Did not look up. The hallway smelled of industrial cleaner and old machinery and the particular staleness of a building that had been slowly dying for years without anyone officially announcing it yet. He was 52 years old. He had given this mill 3 decades of his life. He owned nothing. He had saved almost nothing. He had a borrowed bicycle, a single-room apartment above a closed hardware store on Blevin Street that cost him $410 a month, and a rotating wardrobe of shirts he washed himself on Sunday evenings in the bathroom sink. Everyone in Clover Ridge knew Desmond Pruitt. Everyone respected him when his name came up. Everyone went home to their families and their houses and their futures, and Desmond went home to Blevin Street, alone, and did the same thing tomorrow. That was the cruelty of a life like his. Not the shouting kind. Not the kind that makes a man furious enough to change something. Just the quiet, grinding kind. The kind made out of being trusted enough to keep around for 30 years but not valuable enough for anyone to ever say, "This man deserves better than this." He had a daughter named Brianna. She lived in Columbus, 3 states away, and called on Sundays when she remembered, which was about every other week. She had escaped Clover Ridge on scholarship money and sheer will, and Desmond was proud of her in the deep, uncomplicated way of a man who has no ambitions left for himself but all of them left for his child. She sent him a gift card on his birthday. She worried about him vaguely and from a distance, the way good children sometimes worry about parents they don't quite know how to reach anymore. She had not visited in 14 months. Desmond told himself that was fine. That she was busy. That this was what it looked like when the life you raised your child toward actually worked out. He had 2 people at the mill he considered friends in anything more than the casual sense. Wendell, who ran the floor machine on the 2nd level and always saved Desmond a seat at the picnic table during lunch. And Josephine, the break room attendant who topped off his coffee without being asked and called him Des with a warmth that felt genuine rather than performed. And he had, in the odd way that solitary people sometimes build connections with other solitary people, a quiet friendship with an old man named Harlan Whitecross. Harlan Whitecross was 91 years old and had not spoken willingly to most of Clover Ridge in the better part of a decade. He was not a warm man. He had never been warm, according to the people who remembered him from before the auto repair shop on Fincher Road closed. He was precise. Exacting. The kind of mechanic who could diagnose an engine problem before you finished describing it, who kept his tools laid out with the seriousness of a surgeon and charged exactly what he quoted with no room for negotiation in either direction. 40 years of honest work. And then one morning in his early 80s he had padlocked the garage door, nailed plywood over the service window, and retreated into the house behind the shop without an explanation for anyone. People assumed age. Bitterness. The way very old people sometimes simply close themselves off from a world that has started to feel more foreign than familiar. They were not entirely wrong. Desmond had met Harlan by accident 8 years earlier, when the old man's porch steps had rotted through. Harlan had stopped Desmond on the sidewalk during his morning bicycle commute, in the reluctant way of a man who had exhausted all other options, and asked whether he knew anyone who could fix them for a reasonable price. Desmond fixed them that same weekend. He did not charge Harlan anything. Not because he was trying to ingratiate himself. Simply because the old man needed help and Desmond was capable of providing it, and to Desmond, those two facts together were always enough. Harlan was startled enough by this to offer instant coffee afterward. And from that unremarkable beginning, something had grown between them. The quiet kind of friendship that forms between two people who have both given up requiring much from the world and have therefore stopped requiring much from each other. Desmond came on Saturday mornings when his schedule allowed. He fixed things when they needed fixing. He listened when Harlan talked, which the old man did rarely but more than with anyone else in Clover Ridge. He never asked Harlan for a thing. Harlan died on a Thursday morning in March. The mail carrier noticed the uncollected stack and called the county. He was 91. No living relatives anyone could locate. No spouse, no children, no siblings. Just the house and the shuttered garage on Fincher Road, and 3 years of unpaid property taxes, and an outstanding hardware supply balance, and a handwritten will he had left with the county clerk's office 6 years earlier. The public administrator opened it expecting nothing. The will contained a single bequest, handwritten in Harlan's precise, angular hand, witnessed and notarized in the manner of a man who did not do things carelessly even when he was doing something completely unexpected. To Desmond Pruitt of Blevin Street, Clover Ridge, Kentucky, the only man in this town who came around without wanting something, I leave the contents of the rear storage bay of the garage at 414 Fincher Road. He'll know what to do with it, or he won't. Either way it's his. The county clerk called the mill. Desmond was in the third-floor stairwell with his mop when Josephine found him and said the front desk had a call for him from the county office. He went down, wiped his hands on his work rag, and took the receiver from the front desk attendant who held it at arm's length the way people held things they weren't sure about. He listened without interrupting. He said thank you. He asked if there was anything to sign. She told him to come by the office. He went on his lunch break. Word was already moving through the mill by the time he got back. That was how Clover Ridge worked. By 3 o'clock, versions of the story had reached every floor, and most of them had acquired a layer of comedy somewhere along the way. Craig Fetters stopped him in the same stairwell where the suited men had laughed that morning. "So old Harlan left you his mess," Craig said. Not quite a question. More like a conclusion Craig had already reached on everyone else's behalf. The man owed back taxes on 2 properties. Whatever's in that garage is probably worth less than the cost of dealing with it. "I appreciate the thought," Desmond said. "Ronnie Birch at the salvage yard already called me looking for your number," Craig added, which told Desmond everything he needed to know about how quickly the town moved when it smelled something. "He said he'll give you $250 for the lot. Tow it away same day, no hassle." Desmond nodded. "I'll think about it." Craig's expression said he thought that was the kind of thing a man said when he was going to do exactly what he'd been told. At the picnic table, Wendell was careful in the way people got careful around something they didn't want to get too involved in. He drank his coffee. He said, "Eventually, you going to look at what's in there first, at least." "I'm going on Saturday," Desmond said. Josephine refilled his cup without being asked. She said nothing. That was her way of saying she was on his side. 2 women from the finishing floor were talking loud enough for him to hear while he mopped near the break room door. Can you imagine? 30 years of mopping and your big inheritance is a garage full of broken-down cars. Laughter. At least it's something. More laughter. The comfortable kind. The kind people produce when they're not being cruel on purpose, which is its own particular flavor of cruelty. Desmond finished mopping. He wrung out the mop. He went home to Blevin Street and ate rice and beans he'd stretched across the week and thought about Harlan Whitecross in the quiet, unhurried way he thought about most things. He went to Fincher Road on Saturday. The padlock was one he recognized. He had helped Harlan replace it 2 winters back when the original rusted through. He had the combination in his wallet, written in pencil, the way he always recorded things Harlan told him, carefully and without asking for explanations that weren't offered. The rear storage bay was cold and dim. 2 salvage vehicles he recognized immediately as worth nothing, a rusted pickup on cinder blocks with no engine, a 70s station wagon stripped to bare metal. And against the back wall, under a canvas top gone stiff with age, coated in dust and bird droppings and years of undisturbed silence, something else entirely. Desmond stood in front of it without moving for a while. He pulled the canvas back. The car underneath was rough by any honest measure. Paint flaking off in long strips, revealing rust the color of dried blood beneath. One rear tire dissolved almost completely to the rim. A cracked windshield. A long crease down the driver's door like something heavy had been dragged along it years ago. But the shape. The shape was not a rough thing. Long low. A hood that reached forward with a kind of intention that didn't belong to an ordinary vehicle. A roofline that curved down toward the rear in a slow, deliberate arc, graceful even under the damage, the way something handmade is graceful. Not the graceful of something designed by a committee for a price point. The graceful of something that had once been made to be exactly what it was and nothing else. Desmond walked around it slowly. He pressed his palm flat against the hood and felt the curves under his hand with a precision that spoke of something not stamped from a factory mold alongside thousands of identical copies. Near the front grille, nearly invisible under grime and oxidation, he could just make out an emblem. He took out his handkerchief and cleaned it carefully. The way you cleaned something you didn't want to damage. A horse. A small rearing horse, cast in metal so fine he could feel individual detail through the cloth. He stood up slowly. He looked at the car from 10 feet away, the way you step back from a painting to see the whole of it. He did not know what it meant. He was not a car man in any collector's sense. He simply knew that what his hand had felt and what was emerging from the grime were telling him something he didn't yet have the language for, and that the scrapyard's offer of $250 felt suddenly, instinctively wrong in a way that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with something older than logic. He locked the garage. He rode home. He did not call Ronnie Birch. Ronnie Birch called him. He called 3 times that week. The first 2 times Desmond said he was still thinking. The 3rd time, Ronnie's voice had shifted from friendly to something more businesslike, the way voices shift when patience has been calculated and the calculation is complete. Desmond, look. I'll go to 300. That's my absolute final number. You've got back taxes incoming on that property the moment the estate closes, and whatever's in that garage isn't going to pay them. I'm doing you a favor here. I appreciate that, Desmond said. So we have a deal. I haven't decided yet. A pause heavy with contained frustration. All right, Ronnie said. Don't wait too long. What Desmond didn't know, what he found out much later, in a way that landed with all the weight of something you should have expected but somehow didn't, was that Ronnie Birch had already made 2 phone calls of his own before ever dialing Desmond. One to an antique dealer in Lexington who occasionally bought interesting pieces from salvage lots. One to Craig Fetters, who had said in the same easy, careless tone he used for most things, just get him to sign before anyone puts ideas in his head. Desmond learned this after the auction. He sat with it for a long time. The betrayal that cut deeper came from closer. On the 12th day after Desmond first pulled back the top, a flyer appeared on the community board at the gas station 2 blocks from the mill. A photograph of the car, blurry, poor light, with a handwritten note, old car, unknown make. Estate inheritance. Offers considered. And below that, Desmond's name and the mill's phone number. He found out about it when a stranger appeared at the mill asking for him by name. The stranger was Curtis Okafor, which meant the flyer ultimately led somewhere. But that is not the point. The point is that Desmond asked Wendell. Because Wendell was the only one who had known about the car and had been in Desmond's apartment the previous Sunday when Desmond mentioned casually that he wished he understood what he was looking at. Wendell went quiet in the particular way people go quiet when they have done something they are not proud of. "I just thought someone with more knowledge could help," he said. "I didn't mean anything by it." Desmond looked at him for a moment. "You put my name on a public board," Desmond said. Quietly. Without accusation in his voice, because he was not built for accusation. But with a clarity that Wendell would later tell people had made him feel worse than any anger would have. "Des, I'm sorry. I thought I was helping." Desmond nodded once. He did not stop sitting with Wendell at lunch. He was not a man who made people pay indefinitely for a single thoughtless thing. But he moved the things that actually mattered, the things he was genuinely thinking, genuinely feeling, somewhere Wendell could no longer reach. Not out of punishment. Out of simple, quiet self-protection. It was a lesson Desmond had learned so many times over so many years that it had stopped feeling like a lesson and had just become a fact. The people closest to you were not always the people who would guard what mattered to you. Sometimes they were just the people who happened to be nearby. Curtis Okafor had seen the flyer while filling his gas tank on his way through to a sale in Lexington. He was in his late 40s, compact and calm, with a grey-streaked beard and the quiet authority of a man who had spent 25 years doing something he understood deeply and had stopped needing to perform. He restored and occasionally brokered vintage vehicles. He had credentials. He had contacts. And he had, from the moment he peeled that blurry flyer off the community board, a feeling he did not trust himself to name yet but couldn't quite set aside. He waited in the mill parking lot for 2 hours and 15 minutes without complaint. When Desmond came out at 3:30 with his bicycle and his jacket, Curtis was leaning against his truck exactly as promised. They rode out to Fincher Road together, Curtis's truck keeping pace with the bicycle. Curtis walked into the garage. He said nothing for a long time. He circled the car once without touching it. He crouched at the front quarter panel. He stood at the rear and crouched again. He took out his phone and put the flashlight on the undercarriage and held it there with the stillness of a man confirming something he already believes but will not believe without proof. When he turned around, his face was controlled. But not quite controlled enough. "Brother," he said quietly. "Do you have any idea what you are sitting on?" Desmond said nothing. He had learned over 52 years that silence was often the most useful response to a question you couldn't answer yet. Curtis walked to the front of the car and directed his light at the emblem Desmond had cleaned 10 days earlier. The rearing horse on its shield. He held the light there for a long time. "This is a Ferrari," he said. The word settled into the dusty air like a stone dropped into still water. "Not just a Ferrari." Curtis straightened and looked at Desmond with an expression that lived somewhere between professional composure and barely contained disbelief. "The proportions of this chassis. This roofline. The specific curve of these rear haunches. The badge positioning. I've been doing this for 25 years, and I won't say this with certainty until a verification team confirms it. But what this looks like to me, what this looks very much like, is a 1963 Ferrari 250 GTO. A prototype variant." Desmond looked at the car. "Is that significant?" he asked. Curtis let out a slow breath. "The last confirmed 250 GTO sold at public auction went for $70 million, he said. And that one's provenance was never in doubt." The garage was very quiet. "I need to make calls," Curtis said. "I need to bring people here." "May I?" Desmond thought about it the same way he had thought about leaving the Torpon, about not calling Ronnie Birch back, all the small moments in the past 2 weeks when some quiet instinct had told him to wait. "You may," he said. Curtis Okafor made calls. Those calls reached, within 48 hours, a professor named Dr. Philippa Reinhold at Carnegie Mellon, an automotive history specialist whose published work on lost European prototypes from the post-war era was considered the defining body of scholarship in that narrow, obsessive field. Dr. Reinhold made additional calls. 2 of those went to colleagues in Italy who maintained access to Maranello factory archives. Within 10 days, Desmond Pruitt's garage on Fincher Road held for credentialed experts 2 laptop computers loaded with archived blueprints, handheld instruments for metal composition analysis, fiber optic cameras, and 2 thick binders of reference material that Dr. Reinhold carried in a canvas bag and handled the way you handled something irreplaceable. Desmond brought them coffee from a thermos and sandwiches he had made that morning and set them on the workbench without ceremony. Then he stood near the door and stayed out of their way. They worked for 11 hours. It was during the 3rd hour that the first threat arrived. A dark car pulled up on Fincher Road. A man in a pressed shirt knocked on the open garage door and introduced himself as Brewster Gale, representing an estate law firm out of Lexington. He said his client believed he held a creditor claim on certain assets of the Harlan Whitecross estate, assets that had not been professionally appraised before the bequest was executed. In plain terms, Brewster Gale said pleasantly, "Our client believes this vehicle may legally belong to the estate's creditors rather than to any private beneficiary." Desmond said he had a copy of the will. Brewster Gale said they weren't disputing the will. They were disputing the asset classification. He left a business card and drove away. Desmond stood in the doorway and watched the car until it disappeared down Fincher Road. Then Curtis was beside him, and Desmond told him quietly what had just happened. Curtis looked at him for a moment, then pulled out his phone and made a 4-minute call. "I know a woman in Louisville," he said when he hung up. "Maureen Osei. She handles exactly this kind of thing. She doesn't work cheap, but she doesn't lose either." "Desmond." Curtis held his gaze. "Don't let anyone pressure you into signing anything. Don't let anyone tell you that cooperating with their claim is the reasonable thing to do and fighting it is the difficult thing. That is the language they use to get people to give up what belongs to them." Desmond looked at him steadily. "I've been told what the reasonable thing was my whole life," he said. Curtis smiled slowly. "Then you're already prepared." Maureen Osei drove up from Louisville 2 days later and came to Fincher Road rather than asking Desmond to come to her, which told him something about her before she said a word. She read the will, the county transfer record, the notification from Brewster Gale's firm, and Curtis's preliminary authentication notes. She set the papers down and said, "The bequest is valid. This is a pressure tactic with weak legal standing. They're hoping you don't know it's weak. Don't respond to their firm, let me respond. We file a protective notice with the county, establish your clear title, and make the legal position so unambiguous that pursuing it costs them more than they'll ever gain." She looked at him directly. "This is your car, Mr. Pruitt. Harlan Whitecross left it to you legally and of his own free will. Do not let anyone convince you otherwise." For 30 years, Desmond had been told what the reasonable thing was. Take the $250 from Ronnie. Don't fight the closure. Don't expect more than what you've got. He looked at Maureen Osei. "Handle it," he said. She filed the protective notice. She sent a formal response that Brewster Gale's firm did not answer. Within 3 weeks, the challenge appeared to go quiet, like water receding from high ground. Desmond paid her invoice from the small fund he'd been saving for a new bicycle tire. He asked Josephine to cover his lunch shift tip the following week, which she did without asking why, because that was Josephine. It was during the 5th week of the authentication process, on a quiet Tuesday evening when Desmond was alone at the garage, simply being present with something he didn't fully understand yet, that he found the letter. The driver's seat. Original cracked leather, worn through in 2 places. He had passed his eyes over it a dozen times. But that evening the light from the high window hit the stitching along the seat's left base at an angle he hadn't seen before, and something was wrong. A seam where no seam belonged. Slightly raised. Deliberately different from the symmetrical stitching everywhere else. He worked it open with his penknife, slowly, carefully. Inside the hollow base, wrapped in oil-treated canvas, was a manila envelope. Inside the envelope, a single folded letter. And a black and white photograph. The handwriting was Harlan's. Desmond knew it from years of notes left on the workbench. He sat down on the cold concrete floor and read. Desmond. If you're reading this, you didn't take Ronnie Birch's money. Good. I hoped you wouldn't. The car came to me in 1974 from a man named Fletcher Gaines, a mechanic out of Nashville I'd known since the 60s. Fletcher had come by it through circumstances he never fully explained and I never pushed on. He was in trouble and needed cash and offered me the car against 3 years of parts and supply debt he owed me. I knew what it was the moment I looked at it. Anyone who knew engines in those years would have. I disguised it. Changed the badge. Made cosmetic alterations. I'm not proud of the reasons. The honest version is that I was a young man who found something extraordinary and was afraid that telling the truth about it would mean losing it, and so I told myself I would figure out the right thing later. Later became 30 years. Then it became all of them. There is one other thing you need to know. This is the part that matters most, and I should have told you face to face on a Saturday morning, but I was a coward about it like I was a coward about most things that required courage. Fletcher Gaines sold me this car. But Fletcher was not the last person to claim it. In 1987, a man named Aldous Crane out of Nashville contacted me. He said Fletcher had owed him money and had no right to transfer the car. He threatened legal action. He had what he claimed were documents showing prior ownership. I never heard from Aldous Crane again after I told him I had no idea what he was talking about. I assumed he gave up. I assumed, for 37 years, that he had simply gone away. I may have been wrong about that. The photograph in this envelope shows the car as it was. Keep it safe. If anyone ever comes claiming prior ownership, this letter and what the photograph shows about the car's condition in 1974, under my care, in my garage, should make clear enough who had actual possession for the past 50 years. But more than the legal matters, this car belongs to history, and I want the man deciding what happens to it to be the only person in 30 years of Saturdays who never once came around looking for something. That's you, Desmond. It was always going to be you. Do something good with it. That is all I have to say. H.W. Desmond read it twice. He looked at the photograph. A younger Harlan, perhaps 50, standing beside the car in a different garage. The car in the photograph was clean. Gleaming. The prancing horse emblem unmistakable even in the grain of old black and white film. He sat on the cold concrete floor for a long time. Then he put the letter and the photograph carefully back into the envelope, pressed it flat between his palms, and placed it inside the breast pocket of his jacket, close to his chest. He picked up his phone and called Maureen Osei. I found something in the car, he said. You need to read it. She drove back to Clover Ridge the next morning. She read Harlan's letter standing at the workbench. She read it again sitting down. She looked at the photograph for a long time. She said, carefully, this is important, Desmond. Not just for the authentication. For everything that might come next. If this Aldous Crane is still alive, or if he left heirs who inherited his grudge along with his paperwork, someone may eventually try to use whatever documents he had. Can they win? Desmond asked. She was quiet for a moment. Not if we handle this correctly. Harlan's letter establishes an unbroken chain of possession from 1974. Your legal title is solid. But this needs to go into the record now, before the authentication is complete and before the auction value is public knowledge. Because once the world knows what this car is worth, every piece of paperwork that has ever been near it becomes someone's leverage. Then handle it, Desmond said again. She did. The authentication was completed on the 18th of December. Dr. Reinhold called personally. Her voice carried something warmer than its professional default. It's confirmed, she said. The chassis, the engine block, the manufacturing marks, the cross-reference documentation from the Maranello archive. This is the third prototype, Mr. Pruitt. The one the world believed was destroyed in 1971. It is genuine. It is extraordinary. And it belongs to you. He thanked her and sat at his kitchen table on Blevin Street and let the silence be what it was. He called Brianna in Columbus. she answered on the third ring, slightly breathless, always between something and something else. He heard the faint background sounds of her Columbus life, full and busy, 3 states away. "Something has happened," he said. "I need you to come down." She came the following weekend. She drove down on Friday evening and parked in front of his building on Blevin Street and stood in the doorway of his apartment and looked at the single room with the bathroom sink where he washed his shirts on Sundays, and something moved across her face that she tried to hide and didn't quite manage. 14 months. She had not stood in this room in 14 months. "Daddy," she said quietly. "I know," he said. "Come sit down." He told her everything. The will. The garage. The shape under the torp. The emblem. Curtis Okafor. The experts. The legal challenge. Maureen Osei. The letter in the seat. Brianna sat across from him at the small kitchen table with both hands wrapped around the coffee mug he'd set in front of her, very still in the way he recognized from when she was small and trying hard not to cry. "How much?" she asked finally. He told her the estimated value. She set the mug down. "Daddy." Her voice broke on the word. "Daddy, I haven't, I kept meaning to come down and I just." "Brie. I didn't even, you've been here alone this whole time, and you were going through all of this alone, and why didn't you call me sooner?" He looked at her. "Because I needed to understand it myself first," he said. "And because you had your own life to be living." She started crying then. Not the polite, controlled kind. The real kind, the kind that had been building for 14 months of Sunday calls and grocery store gift cards and the particular guilt of a child who loves a parent deeply but has been living the life that parent worked to give them and has not been looking back enough. Desmond reached across the small table and put his hand over hers. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said. "I should have been here more. You are here now." The auction was organized through a specialist house in New York. The date was set for the second Saturday in March. On the 4th day of February, 38 days before the auction, Maureen Osei called Desmond at 7 in the morning. Her voice was controlled in the particular way of someone who is managing their own response before managing someone else's. "There's been a development," she said. "A man named Preston Crane has filed an emergency petition in Davidson County, Tennessee, claiming prior ownership of the vehicle. He is the son of Aldous Crane, the same man Harlan mentioned in his letter. He has produced what he describes as a bill of sale from 1973, predating Harlan's possession, and he has petitioned a judge to issue a temporary restraining order preventing the vehicle from being transported, sold, or transferred until the ownership claim can be adjudicated." Desmond was quiet. "The judge," Maureen said carefully, "has granted the temporary restraining order." The garage on Fincher Road was frozen. The auction was in jeopardy. The car was not going anywhere until a court decided whose it was. Desmond sat down in the kitchen chair. 38 days before the auction. After 30 years of showing up every morning at 5:45 and asking for nothing. After Harlan's letter and Curtis's certainty and Dr. Reinhold's confirmation and every Saturday morning on Fincher Road. After all of it, a piece of paper from 1973 that a dead man's son had produced out of nowhere, filed in a county 3 states away, and a judge had signed without knowing anything about Desmond Pruitt except that he was the person standing between a claimant and what might be $67 million. He sat in the chair for a long time. Then he picked up the phone and called Brianna. "Something has happened," he said. "Again." The next 3 weeks were the worst of the entire ordeal. Not because the claim was strong. Maureen was clear and consistent on this point. Preston Crane's bill of sale was a photocopy, not an original. The notarization on it was from a county office that had no record of the transaction in its archived files from 1973. The document had the smell of something assembled rather than discovered, details slightly too convenient, the papers aging inconsistent in ways a forensic examiner could demonstrate. But the temporary restraining order was real. And in the legal world, a weak claim with a real TRO was still a claim with a real TRO, and dismantling it required work and time and money that Desmond did not have and Maureen was spending on his behalf against a bill she had stopped mentioning. The auction house in New York had been notified. They had placed the lot on conditional hold. They would honor the March date if the legal matter was resolved in time, but they could make no guarantees. The car sat in the restored garage on Fincher Road, covered again, the way it had been when Desmond first found it. Going nowhere. Desmond went to work. He mopped the floors. He picked up his coffee from Josephine. He ate his lunch at the picnic table. He said very little to anyone, which people interpreted as grief or anxiety, and which was actually something quieter and harder to name, a kind of waiting that had no visible end point, the kind of waiting a man learns to do when he has spent his entire life in situations where patience was the only tool he had. Brianna called every day. Sometimes twice. She had started researching, contacting people, doing the things people did when they couldn't bear feeling helpless. Desmond let her. It gave her hand something to do. It was Brianna who found it. She had been searching old Nashville newspaper archives online, the kind of tedious, methodical digging that required hours and produced mostly nothing, when she came across a brief item from 1987. A legal notice. A debt collection filing by one Aldous Crane against the estate of one Fletcher Gaines, deceased. The filing listed several assets Aldous Crane claimed Fletcher had sold without authorization, including, buried in the middle of the list under dry legal language, an automobile described only by color and approximate model year. No chassis number. No make. No specific identification. She sent it to Maureen at 11 o'clock at night. Maureen called her at 7 the next morning. "This is the crack," Maureen said. The 1987 filing proves Aldous Crane knew about a claim in 1987 and chose to file it against Fletcher's estate, not against Harlan. If he truly believed the car had been transferred to Harlan without authorization, his remedy at the time was to go after Harlan, not Fletcher. He didn't. Which means either he didn't know the car was with Harlan, or he didn't believe his own claim was strong enough to pursue against someone who was actually present and could refute it. She paused. Either way, the 1987 filing is an admission that his claim died with Fletcher. Preston Crane cannot resurrect a claim his father abandoned 37 years ago. And now we can prove the abandonment. She filed the counter-motion the following morning. She attached Harlan's letter. She attached the photograph of the car in Harlan's garage in 1974, the same car, identifiable by the specific dent in the driver's door, the same badge, the same roofline, evidence that Harlan had open and uncontested possession from the beginning. She attached Brianna's discovery from the 1987 archive. She attached Dr. Reinhold's authentication report, which established beyond professional doubt what the car was and where it had come from. The counter-motion landed in Davidson County on a Wednesday. The temporary restraining order was lifted the following Monday. Desmond got the call from Maureen at 8:14 in the morning. He was in the stairwell at the mill with his mop. "It's over," she said. "The TRO is lifted. Preston Crane's petition has been dismissed with prejudice, which means he cannot refile it. The auction house has confirmed the March date is intact." Desmond stood in the stairwell for a moment. "Thank you," he said. "Desmond." A pause. A rare shift in her professional voice. This was never in real danger. "You should know that. The claim was always weak. But I want you to understand something else." "What?" "The reason it's fully over, the reason the judge dismissed it with prejudice instead of just lifting the TRO and leaving the door open, is Harlan's letter. That letter named the threat before it materialized. It described Aldous Crane by name. It documented possession from 1974. It was written by a dead man who had no reason to lie, in handwriting that matched his county records, tucked inside a car that a credentialed team of experts had just confirmed was exactly what he said it was." She paused. "Harlan protected you," she said. "Even from something he was afraid to tell you directly while he was alive. He protected you anyway." Desmond stood in the stairwell, the mop in his hand. The same hallway where a suited man had laughed about 30 years mopping the same floor. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "I know." The date was the second Saturday in March. Brianna drove down from Columbus and picked Desmond up in a rented car. She insisted on driving. He let her, because she needed to do something with her hands, and because he understood that this was partly her making up for the 14 months she couldn't get back. They drove to New York together. 9 hours. They stopped once for coffee and gas. They talked more in those 9 hours than they had in the past 2 years combined, about her life in Columbus, about his life on Blevin Street, about her mother who had died when Brianna was 11 and whose absence had shaped the particular quietness of both of them in ways neither had fully put into words until this drive. They arrived in New York at dusk. The city rose around them as they came in from the south, enormous and lit against a sky the color of an old bruise. Desmond looked at it through the passenger window. He had never been to New York City. He had spent 30 years in Clover Ridge, Kentucky, mopping floors. The auction room was full by the time they arrived. Old money. New money. The European collector community that tracked discoveries like this the way other people track breaking news. Journalists. A television crew from a cable channel that covered rare vehicle auctions. Representatives from 2 automotive museums. People who had flown across ocean specifically to be in this room on this morning for this car. And at the end of the second row, in a freshly pressed jacket he had owned for 4 years, Desmond Pruitt. Beside him, Brianna, who had not let go of his hand since they walked through the door. The bidding opened at $6 million. Desmond watched the paddles rise. He watched faces that had never known what it meant to count rent. Faces that moved $6 million the way other people moved $6, without drama, without ceremony, simply as part of what a morning looked like. The number climbed. 10 million. Desmond thought about the bicycle. About the rear tire he'd replaced with a used one last spring because a new one was $42 and $42 was 2 weeks of groceries. 15 million. He thought about the hallway. The suited man's voice, 30 years mopping the same floor. Who? 22 million. He thought about Preston Crane's name on a court filing. About sitting in the kitchen chair on Blevin Street at 7 in the morning and hearing the words temporary restraining order and understanding that even this, even Harlan's gift, was something someone would try to take from him. Even now. Even after everything. 30 million. Brianna's hand tightened over his. 46. He thought about the Saturday mornings. Instant coffee and the particular silence of 2 people who have stopped needing to fill the space between them. He thought about a letter in a seat, written by a man who was afraid to say the important thing out loud but wrote it down in the dark so it would still be there when it was needed. The only man who came around without wanting something. 59 million. 3 bidders had become 2. 2 became 1, a silver-haired man near the front who had been raising his paddle with the unhurried steadiness of someone who decided before entering the room exactly how far he was willing to go. 63. $67 million. The gavel came down. The room erupted. Applause and disbelief and the buzzing electricity of people who had witnessed something they would describe for years to anyone who would listen. Desmond sat very still. Brianna was crying. He put his free hand over hers so that both of his hands were holding one of hers, and he looked straight ahead at the stage where the car had been, and he felt something he could not name in any language he owned. It was not happiness exactly, though it contained happiness. It was not vindication, though it contained that too. It was closer to the feeling of arriving somewhere you did not know you had been traveling toward. And underneath that, quiet, steady, undeniable, the sense that a man who had mattered to nobody for 30 years had just been seen. Fully. Completely. By the room and the number and the history and the world beyond Clover Ridge that had never known his name. He had not changed. He was exactly who he had always been. The world had finally caught up. What Desmond Pruitt did with $67 million became the kind of story people in Clover Ridge told for the rest of their lives, and then told their children as a reminder of the kind of person it was possible to be. He did not move away. That was the first thing people heard, and the thing that surprised them most, because everyone assumed that the natural response to that kind of money was to leave. He bought a house in Clover Ridge. 3 bedrooms. A porch. A yard with a persimmon tree he liked. He set a spare room aside for Brianna, who had already promised, and this time meant it, to come down more. He purchased the Callaway Mill outright before February ended. He hired a management firm Maureen recommended. He signed employment contracts for all 83 workers scheduled to lose their jobs on the last day of February, at wages that reflected what the work had always actually been worth. He did this quietly, with no announcement and no press release and no invitation for anyone to photograph him doing it. The workers found out through letters. Craig Fetters found out through a letter like everyone else. He called Desmond on a Thursday evening, his voice carrying something the thank you alone couldn't hold. "You knew about the call," Craig said. "To Ronnie?" "Yes." A pause. "And you still?" "I had 82 other people to think about," Desmond said. "And I wasn't going to let what you did decide what I did." He said goodbye and stood at his kitchen window in his new house and looked at the persimmon tree, bare and grey in the February light. He paid the 3 years of back property taxes on for 14 Fincher Road and had the garage and the house behind it restored by a local contractor, the first significant construction work Clover Ridge had seen in several years, which meant local workers, local wages, local lumber. And on the front of the restored garage, above the door, on a simple brushed metal sign, the Harlan Whitecross Academy. The academy opened the following September. It trained young people in mechanical restoration, engine repair, bodywork, automotive history, the preservation of machines that carried stories the world was in danger of losing. Curtis Okafor came on as primary instructor. Dr. Reinhold helped design the curriculum. Maureen Osei set up the non-profit structure at a reduced rate she did not announce. Desmond taught on Saturday mornings. Because Saturday mornings on Fincher Road were where some of his best work had always happened. That had not changed. He was not a man inclined to change what had always worked. On the first day the academy opened, 12 young people sat on folding chairs in the garage bay and looked at him. Some were children of mill workers. 2 had recently come from situations the county's social services records described in bloodless institutional language that never quite captured what people had actually survived. He had not prepared remarks. He was not a prepared remarks kind of man. Harlan Whitecross was not a warm person, he said. He was precise and demanding and he didn't give away much. But he taught me something without ever meaning to. He taught me that something valuable can spend a very long time hidden in a corner, covered up, forgotten, left for dead, and still be worth everything once someone takes the time to look at it properly. He paused. That is as true of a person as it is of a car. He picked up a wrench. Come look at this engine. First thing you are going to learn is how to look at something with patience and without assumptions already made. Because assumptions are how things get covered up and left in corners. And we are not in the business of leaving things in corners. A journalist from Louisville came out to write a piece on the academy 6 months after it opened. She sat with Desmond for 2 hours while students worked around them and asked the questions journalists ask: what did it feel like? What would you tell others? How has your life changed? He answered most of them in the careful, unhurried way he answered most things. Near the end she said, "Is there anything you want people to know? About the whole journey? From where you started to here?" Desmond thought about it. He thought about Craig Fetters and the stairwell. About Ronnie Birch and the $300. About the suited men who had looked at him and seen 30 years of mopping the same floor. About sitting in a kitchen chair at 7 in the morning and being told the car was frozen, the auction in jeopardy, a dead man's son trying to take the last thing a good man had ever given him. He thought about Brianna at 11 o'clock at night in Columbus, searching through old newspaper archives, looking for the one piece of evidence that could save everything, and finding it. He thought about Harlan's letter. About a man who was afraid and wrote the truth down anyway and hid it in the one place he trusted Desmond would eventually find it. He said, "For 30 years, they paid me like I was invisible. Like showing up every single day without complaint, without asking for more than what I was owed, was worth nothing beyond the minimum it cost to keep me there." He paused. Harlan Whitecross was the first man who looked at me, who really looked, and decided I was worth trusting with something that mattered. Not because of anything I had done that the world could see. Just because of who I was in the small moments when no one was watching. He looked at the journalist. "I don't think I was lucky. I think I was exactly who I always was. I think the world just finally caught up with what that was worth." The journalist wrote it down. Those words ended up in the piece. The piece got picked up. It traveled, the way words travel now, across feeds and screens and conversations in places Desmond would never see, landing on people who needed exactly that particular sentence at exactly that particular moment. The comment said things like, "I'm crying," and "This is my father," and "This is me." Desmond did not read the comments. He was not a comment section kind of man. He was in the garage on Saturday morning, with a wrench in his hand and 12 young people watching him show them what patience looked like when it was applied to something that mattered. Outside on Fincher Road, the October light was the same as it had always been. Clear and cold and unhurried. Desmond Pruitt was 52 years old, and for the first time in his life, something he had built was going to outlast him. He thought Harlan would have considered that exactly right.